Yes, it has attracted psychopaths and adventure seekers, drawn largely from disaffected populations of the Middle East and Europe. But the region preached by its most ardent followers derives from a coherent and even learned interpretation of Islam. Have you heard this from anyone?
We have, yes.
Yeah, we have. But you've not heard this from, but you've not heard this from anybody.
No.
Anybody on the, especially on the left.
Not on the left, yeah.
Virtually every major decision and law promulgated by the Islamic State adheres to what it calls, in its press and pronouncements and on its billboards, license plates, stationaries, and coins, the prophetic methodology, which means following the prophecy and example of Muhammad in detail. Muslims can reject the Islamic State, nearly all do, but pretending that it isn't actually a religious millenarian group with the theology that must be understood to be combated has already led the United States to underestimate it and back foolish schemes to counter it. This goes on for pages and pages and pages, but I want to give you a couple of things. They talk about who the infidels are and how if you are not part of this, even in the Muslim world, if you are not backing this, you are marked for death. 200 million Shia are now marked for death by the Islamic State. So too are the heads of every state, of every Muslim country, who have elevated man-made laws above Sharia by running for office or enforcing laws not made by God. Following, I think it's Takfiri doctrine, the Islamic State is committed to purifying the world by killing vast numbers of people. Centuries have passed since the wars of religion ceased in Europe, and since men stopped dying in large numbers because of arcane theological disputes. Hence, perhaps, our denial with which Westerners have greeted news of theology and practices of the Islamic State. Many refuse to believe that this group is as devout as it claims to be, or as backward-looking, or as apocalyptic as its actions and statements suggest. Islamic State is an authentic throwback to early Islam, and they are faithfully reproducing its norms of war. This behavior includes a number of practices that modern Muslims tend to prefer not to acknowledge as integral to their sacred texts. Slavery, crucifixion, and beheadings are not something that freakish jihadists are cherry-picking from the medieval tradition. They are smack in the middle of the medieval tradition and are bringing it wholesale into the current day. If Al-Qaeda wanted to revive slavery, it never said so. And why would it? Silence on slavery probably reflected strategic thinking with public sympathies in mind. When the Islamic State began enslaving people, even some of its supporters balked. Nonetheless, the caliphate has continued to embrace slavery and crucifixion without apology. Quote, "We will conquer your Rome. We will break your crosses. We will enslave your women," said Adonai, the spokesperson. He promised in one of his Valentines to the West. "If we do not reach the time, then our children and grandchildren will reach it, and they will sell your sons as slaves in the slave market." In October, Beck, this is really important. This is the name of the magazine from the Islamic State. Beck, D-A-B-I-Q. They published a story, "The Revival of Slavery Before the Hour." Now, that would lead me to say, before what hour? But if you know what D-A-B-I-Q is, Beck, then you know what hour they're talking about. We'll get to that here in a second. Here's what the author wrote in the magazine. Yazidi women and children are to be divided according to the Sharia amongst the fighters of the Islamic State who participated in the operations. Enslaving the families of the infidel and taking their women as concubines is firmly established as an aspect of the Sharia that no one should deny or mock, because if he would be denying and mocking the verses of the Quran and the narrations of the Prophet, and thereby apostatizing from Islam. This is where it gets truly scary. Under the headline, "The Apocalypse," all Muslims acknowledge that God is the only one that knows the future, but they also agree that he has given us a sneak peek at it in the Quran and in the narrations of the Prophet. The Islamic State differs from nearly every other current jihadist movement in believing that it is written into God's script as a central character. really important to understand. They believe they are in. You imagine somebody said, you're going to a church, and the preacher stands up and says, open up your Bibles to the book of Revelation, because I'm going to show you in the book of Revelation. And he took the book of Revelation and he explained it in such a way that 8 million people would follow. And he would show you that you are in the book of Revelation, and what you do right now brings the Messiah. Can you imagine how all of us would stand against that church? They are written into God's script as a central character. It is in this casting that the Islamic State is most boldly distinctive from all of its predecessors and clearest in the religious nature of its mission. During the last years of the U.S. occupation in Iraq, the Islamic State's immediate founding fathers, by contrast, saw signs of the end times everywhere. They were anticipating the arrival of the Mahdi. Any of this sound familiar? Mm-hmm. The messianic figure destined to lead the Muslims to victory before the end of the world. McCants says a prominent Islamist in Iraq approached bin Laden in 2008 to warn him that the group was being led by millenarians who were taking all the time to talk about the Mahdi and making strategic decisions based on what they thought the Mahdi was going to do when he arrived.
And the problem was, when you said it, everybody would say, oh, but please, no, but we don't believe that, so what? Well, it doesn't matter whether we believe it or not.
They do.
They believe it, and they're trying to bring it on. And that's what you have to fight against.
Okay. These will include the belief that there will only be 12 legitimate caliphs, the 12th Mahdi, the 12th Imam. It now goes into a very important part of this article because it verifies everything that we have been saying since I was at CNN. We must have this conversation. Finally, thank you to The Atlantic for printing this story, because maybe we can begin to have a real conversation and none of this nonsense that they're not Islamic.